This is the second lecture recording for the human population dynamic PowerPoint. So the first section, I went over the science of demographics. Now I will be covering world population growth through time. I will also go into the human population and the environment. So the first learning objective for this section is to identify the factors that led to rapid population growth for humans. So there are 3 factors, and I gave you a video so that you can identify what those factors are. Second, you need to summarize how birth and death rates affect population size as a country progresses through the demographic transition model. Finally, you need to be able to explain how consumption and population size affect the health of the planet's ecosystems. So here is the video. The factors that I'm looking for, the first one, increased human population growth considerably, starting around when our population was at 8 million. The second 2 factors come into play when our population is about 1 billion. So you will need to watch this video to determine what those factors are. Okay, here is the demographic transition model. So basically what this is looking at is how birth rates and death rates affect population growth at different periods of a country's development. So let me write that down for you. Let's see, I'm gonna write it right here. Now, your book, I put information in text. Your book goes into the demographic transition model quite a bit. Okay. Okay, so here's my definition for the demographic transition model. So let's take a look at it. There we go. Okay, so here are the 4 stages. Excuse me for looking off to the side. I have my toolbar over on my other monitor. So the first stage is the pre-industrial stage. Okay. Now, what we're looking at here, so this arrow is death rate, this arrow points to birth rate, and this arrow points to population growth rate. Now, remember, when you are looking at a rate, you look at the slope of the line. So we're at pre-industrial age. I'm going to clear this off here. Okay, so this is where I'm looking at. Now, if you look at birth and death rates, okay, they're right here. There's a lot of births, but there's also many people dying. Okay, so the birth rate is not increasing, the death rate is not increasing, it is leveled off. So when you see a straight line like that, it means the rate is not increasing or decreasing, it is staying the same. But it's high up on the y-axis, which is population, right? So there's a lot of births, a lot of deaths, and they kind of cancel each other out. So what that means is here for population growth, the population is not growing, okay, because births and deaths kind of cancel each other out. Now, this is the pre-industrial stage. So what this says down at the bottom is big families are farming, death and disease are commonplace. So this is before the Industrial Revolution. It's before mechanized agriculture, right? Before we had like tractors and stuff like that. So that the pre-industrial age, we pretty much all countries have passed out of this particular stage of the demographic transition, right? Most countries have mechanized agriculture now. So let's look at the second stage. So here we are at mechanization of agriculture and urbanization has started. That means people are starting to live in cities. So this is the stage at which you see rapid population growth. So here we have a birth rate. The birth rate's not going up, but it's still, there's a lot of babies being born. The death rate though, and this is the important part, the death rate is decreasing. So you have a lot of people that are being born, but not as many people are dying. So what you see here is that population, see the slope on the line, is increasing. Population growth rate is increasing. So population size is increasing. Okay, so what that tells you is in societies across the world, as agriculture became mechanized, the death rate went down, birth rate stayed the same, and the population grew. But why is that? Why, just because we started using machines for agriculture, why did that decrease death rate? Well, your book goes into this quite a bit. So basically, death rate goes down when people have better nutrition, right? So what you're seeing here is people were in better health in general. Okay, there was more food available, the food was of higher quality, so people stopped dying of diseases that are related to like a compromised immune system from poor nutrition. So this is why on the second stage, it says food plentiful, people healthy. Okay, now we have mature industrial age. So most countries have passed out of the second stage of the demographic transition. Now, for this third stage is where you're going to find a lot of, say, developing countries. So here, in this stage, the birth rate is starting to fall now. Okay, people have realized, oh, you know, not as many babies are dying, so maybe we don't need as large a family. Also, with the mechanization of agriculture, kids were not needed in the fields as much as they were before. And with people moving into the cities, it costs more money to raise a lot of kids. So birth rate is going down. Death rate, remember, it decreased in the previous stage. Death rate is kind of leveled off, but it's relatively low. There's not a lot of people dying. And birth rate is declining, but you still see an increase in population growth and the population growth rate. And that is because, well, there's several reasons for that. Let me get my pointer here. So one of the reasons that population size was, or growth rate was still going up, is that in the previous stage, there were a lot of kids born, right? There's a lot of people. When those kids age into like reproductive age, okay, they have their babies. And so population is still growing, even though birth rate is going down. It's kind of like what we call a lag effect. Now, like I said, a lot of developing countries, and developing means, like I said before, like India, Mexico, places like that, South and Central America. It says baby survival up and women have more work opportunities. Now, remember from the previous recording, with total fertility rate, Women who do not have work opportunities tend to have a higher fertility rate, which is not, like I said before, this is not a judgment statement, it's just the data. So as women start to enter the workforce, that birth rate also goes down. Now, this final stage, which is where we find the US and most developed countries, is called the post-industrial age. People live longer as fewer babies are born. So if you look here, the birth and death rates have pretty much leveled off, and they're low, right? We're not having as many babies, and people are not dying at the same rate that they were before. Okay, we have vaccines, we have antibiotics, we have better public health care systems. So that is increasing life expectancy and decreasing the death rate. But birth rate is low too. So what does that do to population size? Well, here, the population is big, but growth rate has leveled off. Okay, we're not growing like we used to, but we still have a large population. So that is the final stage of the demographic transition model. Now, remember that for your learning objective, you need to know how birth and death rates affect population growth at the different stages of the demographic transition model. So let's just review this. Post-industrial age, the first stage, birth rates high. Well, number of births are high, number of deaths are high. They cancel each other out. So the population size is low and it's not really growing. The second stage, mechanization of agriculture and urbanization, death rates falling because we have more food, better nutrition. But birth rate is still high because people haven't quite realized that they don't need to have as many children now. However, with the start of urbanization, families start to realize that it costs more money to raise kids, so they have fewer kids. Mature industrial age, this is where you see a lot of developing countries, so the number of deaths is low. Birth rate is coming down, they're not having as many kids, but population size is still increasing. There's still a growth rate. Finally, post-industrial age, births are low, deaths are low, but population size is high. However, it's not still growing rapidly. Okay, so let's look at, well, why aren't you switching? There we go. Now, what I want to talk about here is the human population growth rate is actually decreasing. Okay, so let's look here. Same colors as before. Well, the developed regions, like the US, our population growth rate is decreasing, as is the growth rate globally and in developing countries. Okay, so there are a few regions where growth rate is not decreasing. I mentioned Central and West Africa, so that still kind of holds true for that. But overall, the human population growth rate is declining. Now, I wrote here, according to the text, which factor has the most significant effect on the health of the planet's ecosystems? That would be not so much human population size, but consumption. How do we consume goods? So let me write that here. Now, I said it's in your text, and I do want you to read your text, but I'm also going to give you the answer here. There we go. Consumption is more important than population size when it comes to the health of the planet's ecosystems. Okay, so it is good that growth rate is declining. So why is growth rate declining? Whoops, I messed that up. There we go. So basically, growth rate is declining as more and more countries. I'm trying to move my text box here and it is not cooperating. Why aren't you cooperating? Anyway, growth rate is declining as more and more countries enter into that final demographic stage. Also, fertility rate, remember the fertility rate graph I showed you? Fertility rate is dropping all over the world. Okay, so most countries are at or below what we call replacement level fertility. So I'm going to write that here. I'm going to move this box here in a second. Okay, most countries are at or below replacement fertility. So replacement fertility is 2.1. So what that means is replacement fertility is when a woman has 2 children, one to replace herself, one to replace her mate. The 0.1 just accounts for infant deaths, right? So 2.1. Okay, so let me see if I can move this now. It's not gonna work. Sometimes Zoom is a little tricky. There we go. Okay, now you can read it. So most countries are at or below replacement fertility. So if a country is at replacement fertility, the growth rate is 0. If it's below replacement fertility, the growth rate is actually below 0, like you're losing people in the population. At replacement fertility, the population is maintained at the same level, it's just not increasing. Okay, so the outlook for actual population growth is pretty good. So it's really our consumption patterns that are damaging to the environment. So just to review this section, let's go back to the learning objectives. There we go. So describe the 2 factors that result in rapid population growth. I'm going to let you figure that out, so I make sure you watch that video. It's a really good video. It's only like maybe 5 minutes long. Summarize how the birth and death rates affect populations growth and size in the demographic transition model. So remember, the first stage, you have a lot of births, a lot of deaths, population size is low, and it's not growing. Second demographic stage, you have mechanization of agriculture. So there's more food, higher nutrient level. So birth rates are, death rate is going down. So fewer people are dying, but birth rate is still high. So a lot of people are having babies and not as many people are dying. So your population size is going to increase. Okay, third stage, you have a drop in birth rates, so not as many babies. Death rate is low, not that many people dying, but your population size is still increasing. And then the final stage, not very many births, not very many deaths, and population size is large, but it's not necessarily growing. So my third learning objective, explain how consumption and population size are related. So what I'm getting at there is that as population size grows, you have more consumption, right? And it's really consumption, the amount of resources that you use, also the resulting waste that affects ecosystem function or sustainability. And we're going to look at some of these consumption trends in the next lecture recording. I'm actually going to split this up and make my last recording over human populations and the environment.